Hi, I'm Arianna, and my presentation is on Walt Disney. Walt Disney was born on December 5th in 1901 in Chicago, Illinois. His father was an Irish Canadian, and his mother was a German American. He had 4 brothers and 1 sister, and he lived most of his childhood in Marceline, Missouri, on a farm that his father took over. On the farm, Walt developed his love for animals. As a child, he began drawing and selling pictures to neighbors and friends. His introduction to motion pictures was by a childhood classmate whose family were fans of theater. He would spend more time at their house than his own. In 1917, he moved with his family back to Chicago. In Chicago, he enrolled in McKinley High School and became the cartoonist of the school newspaper. He also took night classes at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. In mid-1918, he attempted to join the Army but was rejected for being too young. He then forged his date of birth and joined the Red Cross in September. He was shipped to France and drove an ambulance for a year, and he drew cartoons onto the side of his ambulance and had some of his work published. When he returned in 1919, he began working as an apprentice doing commercial illustrations. And in 1920, he and a fellow coworker, Ubi Iwerks, started their own company, which was short-lived and it ultimately failed. They then joined the Kansas City Film Ad Company. At this time, they used cutout in animation. And Disney became interested in animation and experimented at home and decided that cell animation was more promising than cutout. He opened his new business called Newman's Laughograms. It did well, but then it didn't make enough money and they eventually went into bankruptcy. In 1923, he moved to Hollywood with his brother Roy and cartoonist D.B. Iwerks, and they started Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio, but then shortly changed it to Walt Disney Studios. They started out by producing Oswald the Rabbit cartoons for Universal Studios, but later decided to come up with their own characters. In 1925, Disney married Lillian Bounds, who was an ink artist that worked for Disney Studios. Disney Studios' first success was with Steamboat Willie, which was the first full-sound cartoon. It featured Disney's new character, Mortimer Mouse, who we now know as Mickey Mouse, and the name change was actually suggested by Walt's wife. In 1955, he built Disneyland in Anaheim, California, and then he built Disney World in Orlando, Florida in the mid-60s. He was only alive for partial build of Disney World, but the only one that was built to completion under his supervision was Disneyland. His idea for the parks stemmed from his desire for an educational place for adults to entertain their children. And he was diagnosed with lung cancer and ultimately died in 1966. Even though there were so many conspiracy theories that he was frozen, he actually was cremated. His first feature-length cartoon film was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which was debuted in color in 1937. It was one of the first films of its kind to use a new Technicolor technology. Disney animators developed a multi-plane camera to give scenes of the illusion of depth. The film featured a full symphony orchestra for the 6 songs included, and the format, with intermittent songs, was patterned for many of his following films. Today they are labeled as animated music fantasy films. This started the gold age of animation. In 1959, Sleeping Beauty was the next film of that style to be produced and released. The film has now been redeveloped into a spin-off for The Villains, and Maleficent specifically, by Disney's production team. One of the most diverse character collection in Disney's repertoire was included in his production of Fantasia. What began as a short later became a full-length feature. Fantasia is one of the most well-known Disney classics aside from the princess stories. The inclusions of all of these different segments and ideas made it a well-rounded and complete display of Disney's talents as an artist but also as a producer. The movie is comprised of 7 segments. Each segment, while comprised of the same texture, had very different color palettes and drawing styles to complement each story. The most notable segment would be The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was created first. The segment's budget was so heavy, it eventually needed to be turned into a full-length movie to outweigh the deficit. The color palette varied from dark organic hues to the bright tones of Mickey's robes and hat. The color palette also changed when the sorcerer was present to indicate his rigidity. The other segments used the rest of the characters of this poster in various storylines, such as the ostriches that do the ballet and the dance of the hours in conjunction with other animals. The poster also teases the use of music in the film, as it was entirely musical-based creation. Stokowski conducted and arranged traditional classical pieces to create the tone for the animations. The use of music also meant all of the animation had to be timed perfectly to fit the score. All of the characters, even when freeze-framed, show intensive motion, as the entire production was consistently layered motion. An example of this layered motion was the elephantine segment, with the elephants. They are layered over one another in one scene, creating depth, and the layered motion becomes dizzying and hypnotizing. The scene used pinks and bright colors to create this effect. The scene with the mushrooms also used motion to create a lulling and hypnotizing effect, with the mushrooms moving in symmetric concentric circles. The most intimidating segment was the depiction of Chernobog in a dark, menacing scape with deep blues and blacks. While the music in this segment moved and scurried along, the character Chernobog sat on the mountain, unmoving in his limited motion and ominous loom. The use of his slow and intentional motions were juxtaposed by the writing of all of the secondary characters of this segment: the ghosts, the ghouls, and the goblins. The grays and blacks were accented by bright whites during intense musical moments. At the end of the movie, Stokowski is seen shaking the hand of Mickey Mouse, one of Disney's most notable creations. It's no wonder that the feature-length film was created around such a great little personality. Disney's creativity and abilities as a producer were both displayed in the length and variance of the piece. At the time, the concept of animating to classical repertoire was not common and took the genius of him and Stokowski to create. Disney may have created characters and unique stories as ideas as an artist, but his own notoriety far surpasses any character he ever created. Walt Disney is a household name due to his creativity and also his willingness to share it with the world. A large number of Disney's characters are used in contemporary art today due to their fame, and they've been reimagined and redrawn in many different ways by many artists. As of late, the newest trend is that many of his animated films are being remade using live actors. His notoriety for the drawn image is of the highest magnitude and is rivaled but cannot be matched. He created a new genre with his animated musical fairy tales and perfected the mold that is still followed today. The legacy he has created will surely live on for generations, with his influence intertwined in all new productions.